I'm going to try to debug the thing that I'm doing here on C. Not really sure if I'm gonna be able to do it because I don't know how hard it's gonna be, but the intention is gonna be to just learn. I already studied a little bit how to debug, but from the experience I had so far, it's different than debugging on the other languages. So I'm gonna have to get used to uh, or figure out a different pattern for getting into the habit of debugging things. Because as as far as the things that I tried right now, when I print the stuff on C, it just shows the memory location instead of showing the actual thing. And it is something that I took for granted on the other languages. Because in Python and in JavaScript, when you print, you can just visualize the actual data structure you're using. But it seems like on C, it just shows the memory location. So I'm probably gonna have to do something different to understand what's going on. And I already kind of figure out the error that I'm getting in one point of the application, but on the other one, I'm still not sure, which is the one that I'm gonna try to solve first, which is that I'm not getting anything here. So I'm creating an array here outside of this loop, and then I'm creating this object from the library that parses C code into JSON. And then the idea is to create an object that is going to be a node on the graph and pass to the array to push the object into the array and then save the array into the JSON file. But right now it just saves the empty array. So I assume that it's probably something related to the memory that is not working, and I'm not really sure what's going on. And the other error that I'm getting is a segmentation fault, which happens when you're using memory in the wrong way as well. So I think it happens when you're trying to access memory that doesn't exist. And the thing about this that made it more difficult to figure out is that it didn't show any error messages or anything. So I had to, the way that I figure out that is a segmentation fault error was by using the GDB debugger and stepping over the thing, which is also kind of confusing because it's different. It shows you the threads that the thing is actually using, which the CPU has several threads to compute to do the calculations. And so, yeah, it's different than the other languages. So I'm gonna have to see if I'm able to figure out. But first, I think I'm going to do this thing here, which I was gonna do off string before, but I think it is a good idea to do it on string because I think it is a nice thing to do. So I'm gonna mute the sound on the string and I'm gonna do this for 10 minutes. So if you wanna do this as well, just search for this on YouTube. I highly recommend this, and according to Andrew Huberman, this has been shown to increase your baseline of dopamine. So yeah, it seems to be good overall. So I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna start trying to debug this stuff. think I'm gonna put 1 hour and a half, the timer. Then probably take a break. Or see if I'm gonna stop or keep going. The other thing that I did was remove that subdirectory command here because I realized it was creating another build folder instead of here. So every time I would run, it would recreate the whole project. So I decided that's just better to remove the thing. Because I already have the project there built. One thing that I'm contemplating is whether or not it's worth it to use another thing here instead of using the vector to create everything. Because I don't really understand why he decided to create this library to do the thing. I don't understand the trade-offs, so it might be easier to just do it with a normal C vector or a normal array. And I've printed, not sure if that's the right way to say, but I am getting some like numbers here when I print, which makes me think that it is working, like it is creating the nodes. But then for the vector, I'm not really sure because I don't know how to, unless I loop over the vector, and I guess this is the main question that I have. Is the problem is I don't know how the vector works really well, so that's the thing. It's like if I was using JavaScript or Python, I think I would probably just print the array outside of the loop, and then I would be able to see what data structure it is. But in C, I don't think I can do that. But let me put again here and then try to run to see. But if I remember correctly, I'm just I get a number because that's just the place in memory where it is. So let me see something. Yeah, the thing is I'm just allocating something here. So maybe this is the problem. I think I did it this way because I was trying to do it in the same way that he did it, because I thought that obviously that makes sense. And I think the way that he does it is just by allocating space in memory using kloc, or however you say that, and then assigning values there. So he creates this thing here, which is space in memory. Oh, he uses back. Maybe that's the thing. Oh, but that's just a node, I guess. Maybe that's the problem, is because I'm not initializing anymore. No, I'm initializing the graph first, so yeah, in this function I use the vector create, so it is pretty much the same. And then I append, or I push the node to the vector outside. And here. So I create based on the function, which receives the token, the pointer to the token. And then I make the properties of the node equal to the properties of the token. But this is something that I'm not sure as well, because it's like a pointer. So I guess this is one of the main points of confusion that I have, which is like what happens during the execution of the program after I create this stuff here. Because now I have a space in memory pointing to a pointer of the other thing. So this is a pointer, has a value, and then this is another space in memory that it is referencing to that pointer. So that makes things kind of confusing, because I don't really know at the point that I'm gonna call this function, like what is going on, if it's still pointing to the thing. And the thing obviously is that I already saw a bunch of videos about this and studied this a lot, but it's still confusing as fuck. Because I never remember, like, if I have something that I make it equal to the pointer, if I change the value in memory, it should change the reference as well, I think. So in that case, if I assign this value here to this value, which is a pointer, then if during the execution of the program, the current token changes, it's gonna automatically change this value as well, I think, later. And I'm not really sure, like, up until what point this is gonna be still in memory. I think it stays in memory forever unless it's free, I think. So you see you have a function called free, I think. And another video that I saw that he recommends is that after you free the memory for the thing, you have to, it's always better to make that equal to null, the pointer. So if you use a pointer, then you free from in memory, and then right after that you assign it to null, because if you don't, then if you try to free that thing again, if you forgot that it's already freed, not sure if freed is the correct way to say it, but if you already freed the thing before, then if you try to free it again, it gives you an error. So it's always better if you point to null, that doesn't happen. So it's like one thing that prevents you from doing more mistakes. But so the question is, how can I clarify? To me, I'm not really sure about this as well. Like, from what I've seen, is one of those things that there's gonna be like a symmetry that people are gonna have two sides, and it's gonna be. But I think for the most part, on this one at least, most people are gonna, they agree that usually the best way to debug is just to put print statements. And I think that the debugger should only come when you don't understand the system very well. So the most important part is understanding the system. And then once you understand the system, everything becomes like, it becomes a lot easier to debug, because then you know what to look for. And the times when you need to use the debugger is when you don't understand how things work really well, because then it helps you explore everything. So I think it's the difference, like, between understanding the thing, prioritizing understanding, and then after that everything becomes easier, or like trying to solve it from the higher level, let's say, which gives you quick fixes. But then if you never fix on the fundamental level, you always have the same problem, because you don't understand like what is causing the thing. So I think the biggest problem here is that I don't understand really well, like, what is going on. It's hard for me to, even though I've watched a bunch of videos and studied this, it's hard for me to visualize, like, during the entire execution of the program, how does C perceive the memory management, I think, of each thing. That's the thing that I'm trying to clarify. So I want to understand this more instead of just trying to fix the problem, because that's going to allow me to, like, create a new way of thinking than the way that I'm used to on the other languages. That's going to allow me to debug faster, I think. But the challenging part is, how can I come up with questions that are going to be, like, useful for understanding that? And it goes back to the thing that I talked about before, which is when to use each thing. That's the biggest challenge. So, like, why use pointers here to pass the thing? And I think it's because, so maybe one question would be, if you don't pass as a pointer, what happens with the variable? I think it's going to be garbage collected. In Rust, I'm pretty sure that's how it works. So if you create a variable outside and then you pass as an argument to a function, then it's like you're sending that variable to the frame, to the scope of the function. which means that the outside of that scope, the variable is not going to exist anymore because you're actually sending the variable itself. So the main thing loses the variable from memory. And that's why in Rust, usually I think you are supposed to pass the reference instead, because that allows you to keep the pointer. So you're just passing the pointer to the function, and the pointer says like, that's the place where the variable is. And then you change that thing, and then by default it changes the value, I think. So maybe it's the same logic in C. And that's why these are all pointers there. So let me think. So I guess this is one of the things that's kind of confusing, because the vector is a struct. The struct holds information. So like the way that it works is different, I think, than, because I'm imagining obviously an array in my mind, or a list in Python. The way that, but obviously it's going to be different in C, and the way that he did it here. So I think I have to understand this first. So you pass the size of the thing it's gonna have. I'm guessing the size is not the size of the whole thing. It's more, this vector is more a dynamic thing. If you initialize an array in C, I think you have to pass the fixed size, because you can't change size. So there's a difference between vectors and arrays, and I think the vector is like an array but has dynamic memory, so it allows you to expand or contract the size during the execution of the program. And I think arrays have a fixed size, so like you can't. Maybe contract is not it's just expand, because yeah, but I'm not really sure. But if you initialize an array, you have to specify like how long it's gonna be, and then after that you can't, is immutable, you can change. As far as I understand right now, like maybe I'm wrong, but so here I think that this each size is the size that each block of each index is gonna have. One thing that I don't understand very well is that from answers that I got from ChatGPT, the way you usually loop on a vector in C is that you use the for I loop, but then the I is increasing by 1 each time, and I don't understand that really well. Like, what is the relation? Maybe that's a good question to ask first. Like, what is the relationship between the index and the size of the... Because if you're increasing I by 1 to get to the other thing, then how does the index work? So for example, usually like when you do the for I loop, you're gonna access, like, say I have the vector, you access by this, and then it recommends you to create, like, the I starts at 0 and then it goes up to the length, which is gonna be the size of whatever element you have. Like the size of the whole thing, but divided by the size of the element you have, which gives you the size. So, but then it does I++, which means that it only increases the I by 1. So I understand that it's going from 0 to the size of the vector on the logic, but then it's increasing I by 1, and I don't understand really well, because if the size of the data can be dynamic, like it can change, we can have each element of the vector can be a very massive struct, or it can be just an integer, so it's going to change the size that each index is going to occupy in memory. So if that's the case, then how is it possible that you're always going to access the other element just by increasing I by 1? It would make more sense if you had to increase the I by an arbitrary number that is equivalent to the size of each element, I think, in my mind right now. But obviously it's probably not how it works, so I need to clarify how does that... And I think that the reason why that's not the case is because of the way that the C access the indexes, so it's probably separate things, where the index is a pointer, so it works in a linear way, let's say, like 0, 1, and so on. And then from that, it just figures out the space that each element has based on the way that you created the vector first. I think that's how it works. Because each vector or array can only have one data type, I think. Which is another difference from C and the other languages. But I think in general, you usually should probably just, like, it's best practice to only use one data type on the vector, because probably for converting each thing or for manipulating the data, it becomes more difficult if you have different objects because of this, the whole thing about size that I talked about. There's probably something going on under the hood. I think I'm gonna ask that thing for, to ChatGPT. The thing that makes it hard is that the vector that I'm using there is a custom one, so it's not gonna be necessarily the same thing that it is from normal vector, I think. So yeah, I assume like this hash should be the size of each thing. The way that I did here was just by copying the way that he did for the other structures. So copying the same logic. So I'm allocating the size of the struct of each node and passing to this thing here, which would be the each size. Then creates this, makes sense. So it allocates a place in memory for 1 unit of struct vector, which is the data structure there. That's declares here on the header file for the library. These things are the things that I don't understand really well. Like, based on the name, obviously, are different types of indexes, but I don't like understand very well, because I'm not used to thinking about in this way. The other confusing thing about C that is different from the other languages is the pointer types as well. So I assume that because I already got like some mistakes that says something along those lines, that you are assigning a different pointer type to something. So I assume like what happens is that every time you create a pointer, the pointer is gonna inherit the type from the thing you're creating the pointer for. So if you create a pointer for an integer, the pointer type is gonna be integer, and then if you create for a float, it's gonna be float. So the pointer types have to be congruent with each other, which is very annoying, to be honest, to deal with, but the more I learned about this stuff, like, I think there's a balance, but probably if I could go back to the way that I started, I think it's not the best to learn from React first or from JavaScript. Like, I like Free Code Camp a lot based on the style that they do, but the issue is like, when should you learn each thing, I think. So I think looking back at it, I think it would probably be better to learn C++ or C first. But obviously there is a middle ground there. The thing is that, like, it's two extremes. Like, the standard college route, I think, is too much focus on theory. Like, it's too much focus on bullshit that doesn't matter. And like the full self-taught route is too focused on, like, it's too all over the place. So there needs to be like a middle ground, I think. So as far as I know now, the only difference between kloc and malloc is that kloc sets the memory to 0 first, and then it allocates a space in memory that has this size here. So it's pretty much creating a space in memory that has the size of vector for 1 unit, I think, and assigning to this variable. And then this one is assigning the space to this size here, but it doesn't necessarily make everything 0 first. And this is 20. At least 20 vector element spaces in reserve before having to reallocate memory. Okay, so I think I understand. So this is the size of the initial size of the data, which is going to be the thing that the vector contains. I think I didn't put the on his own the other file. So it's the size of the element that you passed. So in my case would be the size of the node times 20. So it allocates memory for 20 of the thing that you passed. Just this thing here. And points to the data. So m index seems to be a pointer to the final part of the vector. The other ones are 0. The size, count is 0. So I'm gonna follow the execution there for the vector so I understand more, like how I have a clear picture in my mind how it works. The thing is I kind of understand already, but it's still hard to think, because in my mind, like, it seems that everything is fine, so... But obviously it's not fine, otherwise it would be putting like objects. So maybe the error is on the JSON thing. I made a mistake on the JSON, like these things here. So this was what I was thinking about before. I should just print this stuff here. But the issue is that if I print, it's just gonna show a number, so it's hard to know if I... For the ID, it's the ID and anything that is an integer, I think it prints the correct number because it's a simple data type. But if you want to print a string, then I think you have to do other stuff to print it, because the string is just going to be a number as well, but it's going to print the place in memory that the string is at, not going to print the string itself. So, but I'm not really sure. Yeah, that's the thing, because I'm not really sure if it's worth it to... What I want to understand is, like, and this is really hard to find as well, I couldn't find videos about this. What is the best way to go about debugging? I think from what I've seen, people usually recommend GDB, I think. But GDB is kind of confusing for me to use here. Maybe I should show. I wrote down the commands here. But for the most part, it shows... I think it's different when you're using GDB in Linux or on Windows, because in Windows what you're doing is just using another program that comes from Visual Studio, I think, or MS Build. Something like that. And then because of that, the way that it's going to communicate with CPU is going to be different. So when I'm using here, it just shows like spaces in memories. It doesn't show like the lines of the functions. Or maybe I'm doing it the wrong way. It's also possible. This is another thing that I'm not sure about, because here, like the way... And this is a pattern that... this is another thing that I was thinking about, is that like instead of learning the... Like, the more that I think about it now, is that I really don't like the way that people usually teach programming. And I think it would be much better, and maybe this is something that I can do in the future. Like, because the more that I program, the more I realize that what matters the most is the patterns that you use all the time. So, like, one pattern that I do all the time, and it's probably the most common pattern, that I'm not 100% sure if it is the best or not, but I think it is. Like, one of the fundamental patterns, which is just... You're gonna have a data structure, then you're gonna have a loop. Like, you're gonna loop through the data structure, and then you're gonna have a bunch of if-else statements inside of the loop, and you're gonna change the data structure based on the loop. And I think that's the fundamental pattern. So looking back at it now, I think it would be much better to learn this way. So like, what are the 80% of the fundamental patterns that you're gonna use all the time in all programming languages, and then create the templates for these patterns, and then based on that, visualize the difference in syntax and the way that you should approach each thing. And I'm struggling to find videos, because usually the way that people teach is more about the, like, telling you how the thing works and not approaching it from the fundamental level. And I think that this is because of the paradox of search that I said, like, before. I wrote the blog post before, because there's a... It's very complicated, but it's lack of incentives and misalignment, because it's very difficult to boil down into a concept, this like notion of the fundamental thing. So it's much easier to say, like, to make a video with the title of how does a map work in JavaScript, for example. Then it is to figure out a title that people are gonna be able to search for. That's gonna explain like what is the fundamental pattern, maybe fundamental patterns of JavaScript or something like that, or fundamental patterns of programming. But then how do you structure things so that people find the video? I think that's the challenging part. But here, what I'm not really sure is that usually the way that I'm used to doing things is that what I'm trying to do here is just create, and the issue is the memory part, I think. So I'm trying to create an object here, then based on this object, this is going to be a JSON object, I create the values of the node, and then I append to the array outside of the loop. So I'm pretty much just, I'm trying to get the struct that I'm creating on C for the node, and then create the object in JSON based on these functions here, and then append to the array, to the JSON array outside of the loop. And then I want to save this array with all the objects. But the thing that I'm not sure about here is what happens in memory, like on the other loop. So the way that I'm thinking about it is that it's gonna create a new space in memory each time that I assign this. But I'm not really sure because I don't know for sure how long this is gonna live. But maybe the assumption that I'm making is correct. That it just lives for throughout the lifetime of the program once you create here. Because then I'm creating this stuff here, and then I'm appending to here, and then I'm not really sure. Yeah, but here I'm gonna save directly here, so maybe it is correct. Because the thing is that this maybe I shouldn't create it as a pointer. So I guess one thing that I can ask is I should search for this one and then search for these other methods. The other thing that he does is set a pointer. So let me go back to following the execution to see how the vector works and how the methods of the vector works. Then I go back to the JSON thing. In my mind right now it should be working because I don't see the main things that it could be wrong is this thing about memory that I'm talking about here that I'm not 100% sure if there's something going on with the memory because I'm recreating this thing here each time inside of the loop, or if it is the thing is that it is not throwing any errors. That's the problem. So it could be the methods here, or it could be that the nodes are not being created correctly. The segmentation fault is because of this other function here that I just put here. So there is an error with the way that I'm assigning memory. It's probably related to pointers that I don't understand really well. So let me go back to the thing. So okay, I think this part I understand. The vector is a struct, and then it allocates the memory here, then for the data initializes with 20, decides for 20 units, and then probably there's a function somewhere. Maybe this is the problem with the segmentation fault, is that you have to manually reallocate memory once it goes over 20 nodes. Maybe this is the issue. And the problem is, as far as I've seen there, I was trying to print a statement because the place that I got these things from was from other parts of the code that he does it, because I thought that there's a higher chance of being correct if I get it from the way that he did it. But then I print it, and it looks like the function is not being called from the place I was copying from. So I'm not really sure, because I haven't seen, like, I'm just doing what he did it, so it makes me think that it shouldn't be an error with the memory reallocation thing. Yeah, so okay, create the graph here, which creates the vectors, and I pass the graph to here, and then here I just call this function passing the token, and then I create a pointer for the. And the only reason why I'm passing a pointer is just because I was like trying to do it in the same way he did it, but I'm not 100% like. Because this is the way that he did it, I think it is correct, but it's kind of confusing to me. Yeah, so here I'm allocating a space in memory and creating a pointer to that space, which is pretty much the way that he does it as well. And then I create these values. So, because this is going to be a struct, so I create these values and I assign to the. This one is going to be a global thing. I think this is not the problem because I was able to print this stuff on the. Maybe I should show here. Yeah, I think I'm gonna recompile and then run because I'm printing there now. The other stuff, and then I'm printing here. I'm printing here. So after I run, then I remove the print statements and put on the other place there. So it's not showing anything, and this means that this is not looping because I assume that, and this is the weird part because I've seen that this is 0 already because I'm setting the pointer to 0 here. So I think this is initialized as 0, and for that reason this doesn't loop. But that's the way that he was doing on the parser here, I think. So I don't understand if that's the case or if I should be doing something different. And here he sets the vector to 0. And then he uses that to create a pointer. Which is pretty much the thing that I'm doing. Like set the pointer to 0, which is the first place on the thing, the vector, I think. And then you call the function from the thing and create the node based on that. So I'm doing exactly the same thing he's doing here. So for me, that's why it wouldn't make sense, but maybe it's a bug on his code, because the thing is, this is the function that I said that I put a print statement here, and it seems like it doesn't print anything, so it looks like this function is not being called, but I think it does call this function at some points. I think it depends on the code that I put on the task.c file, which is the file being parsed. So one thing that I can do is just change the code on the task file, see if I can print anything here. But from what I think this is gonna be 0 in the first place, because it's setting the pointer to 0. So maybe I should look into this function. The vector pick. I think I already looked into this function, but I didn't understand really well. P index is probably pointer index, so it's the index of the pointer is at right now. Maybe I should look into the other one that has the pointer first. So I assume that what is happening is that it's setting the pointer to 0. It's going to be the first index of the vector. And then each time you call the other function, the pointer updates for the other index, and it just returns the data that is contained between the one index and the other. Yeah, so I should look into this one first, then the other one. Yeah, current node 0, which is this thing here. And that's why I think it doesn't loop here. But it doesn't make sense because that's the way that he does it, so maybe... Like, the only explanation is that he made a mistake on the other code. But I think that's unlikely because he would correct if that was the case. pass the vector. So the first is the vector and the other is the index. So it just assigns the p index to 0, which is the pointer index, I think. So now let's look into this one. We'll pass the vector, pass here. So this checks to see if it is the pointer is within the vector, I think. I don't understand. R index only makes sense to me if it's like a right index. But I'm not 100% sure if that's the case or not. This is one annoying thing about this. It's not going to the previous place when I do the double pattern. Like I forgot the name of the thing. This thing here. When I type this symbol twice, you should go to the previous place, but it's not going. I'm not really sure why. This happens on VS Code. Also, just passing the pointer index, the vector and pointer index. It's gonna be this one, and then it checks to see if the pointer index is within the range. This and index. And checks to see if it is lower than vector R index. I think the R index is initialized as the length of the thing, I think. It was initialized as 0 as well. So the M index is the length of the thing. Yeah, so I don't understand this. It doesn't make any sense. I'm thinking I should probably use a normal vector or an array or whatever instead of using this one. Because in the course he uses this a lot, but he doesn't explain why he did it the way they... Maybe he does a little bit in the beginning. I think he briefly talks about it, but doesn't explain each thing. So I don't understand. I think the biggest issue I have here is that I don't understand the indexes. What each index is supposed to be, and if I should change them or not. After initializing. Based on his code, he doesn't change anything later. So he creates the vector and then he just uses these other functions. Maybe I should search for this one. To see what happens, like what he does with the vector later on. He's just pushing the token into this thing here. But he doesn't do anything else, I think. That's the only thing he does there. So he creates the vector and then pushes. But the reason why this is weird to me is because it looks like the other condition is always going to be false. Because it is checking to see if the pointer index is going to be lower than the right index. But if it's initialized as 0 and the pointer index is... I have to set it to 0, then it's always going to be like equal to each other. That makes sense. So this condition... Oh, but this is supposed to be false. No, it's supposed to be true because... No, never mind. So like, this is what is not making sense to me because it seems that this is always going to be false. Because the pointer index is 0 because I set it to 0 in the beginning. So this is going to be the index, and the R index is 0, which is always going to be 0. So this is going to be false, which means that the thing is going to be false. So maybe I should print inside of one of these functions to see. I wonder if I can print the return of the thing. I'm gonna try it, but maybe I assume probably not. I'm just gonna pass this thing here. But maybe a boolean is gonna be, or assign this to a variable and then print the variable instead. I'm just gonna put whatever. And the thing is, this might be used on other parts, but I'm gonna try like this first, then if I get more than one thing, then I'm gonna see what I can do to know where the thing is coming from. But I imagine this is always gonna return false based on the thing. So you're setting the pointer to 0, the peak pointer, which is the P index, and then the R index is always initialized as 0, and then I'm not changing anywhere, but he also doesn't change. So one is always gonna be equal to the other. I guess one of the main fundamental things that I have to clarify is what I'm supposed to, what is the best way to visualize the values, or if I should be going about debugging in a different way, even in the other languages. But the way that it makes sense to me is just print the thing, because it's just easier. Like you see where you're getting. This is the stuff is very hard, because like the hard part is to not necessarily know how to do something, is knowing what is the best way, and then the best way is going to be dependent on the circumstance, because there's infinite complexity, and then the convergence towards the best way is going to be the computation of the network that perceives space-time, because the discussions are going to highlight the computational frequency of the network to find the resolution of accuracy over the complexity of something. So it's always going to be something that changes, and that's the reason why search engines is hard, and that's why 80% of the times, or the most results you're going to find, they have the most gravitational force is going to be related to how to do something, and not what is the best way to do it, because it's just easier. So, and then that's going to go into arguments forever for one side or the other, that are gonna keep converging towards more complexity. So it looks like it is using this twice, and both of the times is 1. So I don't really understand why. This 1 is gonna be true. So I don't understand why this is 1 though. Maybe I should try to print vector index here. That's a good idea. And I also need to think about, not sure if it's worth it to try to figure out where this is coming from. So, because when I printed here, it wasn't showing anything. Maybe I print here again. But as far as I remember, in the case that I'm using there, well, the other thing I realize that's going to be kind of annoying is that when you create things like this, it creates the executable on the file that you build the CMake thing. So the first command, you use CMake, and then it creates the files, creates the cache, creates the CMake folder, CMake files. And then the second command is the build command. It is the one that I'm using now, which is going to compile everything and organize. But the problem is that the resulting thing is always the executable that is the result of the compilation is always going to be on the same folder that the CMake files are, that you build everything. And then I tested passing this file to other places and it doesn't work. And I think that the reason why is because the executable is going to depend on the paths that were created based on the directory here. So this is kind of annoying because then it forces me to like leave the executable on that directory. Because one thing that I was thinking about is that once I create Python API or Python server, I can just get the executables and then put on a folder inside of the server, and then I create some Python or figure out a way for the Python code to call the executable. But the way that I'm thinking about doing now is that I'm gonna have to do it probably is just to put the entire project inside of the Python code, which is kind of annoying. Unless I can think about a different way to do things. $36. Interesting. So what else happens after I create the vector? Maybe it's this thing here, but it should use the same function, so it's not gonna matter, just the data. So the data is gonna be another vector. There's gonna be the size of the thing. So first initialize with whatever size you pass, then save the data as the size of the vector that it just created, I think. No, size of the vector struct. It creates another vector. Vector should be the saves value of the other one. There's like a nested vector. Just kind of confusing. And then it's gonna have the size of the vector times 20 as the data. But in both cases, the R index is always gonna be initialized as 0. So what is going on? Because following the execution here, I just create the vector and then just pass here right away. So I don't do anything with that thing. Maybe it shouldn't change anything. The only moment that it changes is when I append here. Or maybe it's because of that. Maybe, but that would indicate that this is working. So it is working here where I'm passing this data to this vector. So maybe this is the one that I forgot that this is the like sequence of the thing. Because obviously I'm gonna save after I already have pushed the nodes. So the only thing that makes sense is that it is changing the array index every time that I push the stuff there. That's why they're different. And then that way it makes sense because like in the case that you don't change the vector, then it shouldn't go into the loop when you set the pointer to 0. Because they're always going to be the same, but then when you push the stuff to the vector, then it automatically changes the array index, which makes them different, which allows you to loop the thing. So I think that's probably what's happening. Yeah, it's increasing here. So maybe this is the problem, is because, so I got 36 here, which indicates that there are 36 elements. So I think that you should probably have to, like you should, you have to reallocate, like change the size of the vector once it gets to more than 20, and probably you have to do that manually. So the error that I'm getting is probably because there's, but maybe not. Maybe like I only have 20 nodes, but yeah, space for 20 nodes, but I'm trying to pass 36. But I'm not really I don't see how. It might be the case because on the edge function that I'm creating the edges. Yeah, but it wouldn't make sense because I'm creating them from the nodes themselves. But maybe it's overriding some stuff. Not really sure. Yeah, the problem for the segmentation faults is on this function here. But this function, like, if that was the error, then like it wouldn't make sense here because you would still have 20 nodes, even though the space is, like, the data might be incorrect for each node, but it would have 20 nodes, I think. And then these would just loop over them. Maybe it's because maybe it could be because of the way that I'm picking here. Because I have to reset, probably. I'm not really sure. Yeah, it's probably a good idea to just comment it out instead of just leaving like this. The reason why I was leaving like this is because it's better, it shows less outputs, which is another thing that I'm gonna have to see here now. But I don't want the thing to print the assembly commands that it's getting as a result. And right now it is printing, but it's printing somewhere that I'm not really sure. I think it's on either the code, it's probably on the code generation part. That somewhere along the line it uses print statements to print the assembly commands that you're gonna get as a result of the compilation. And then it makes the thing crowded and makes it harder to see the stuff that I'm trying to print. So I thought, like, it's just better to leave this stuff here because then it breaks the program and then doesn't show the stuff for now, because that's something that I'm gonna look after I fix the other stuff. So, but maybe this one is interfering with the other one. I'm not really sure. It could be the problem could be because of the way that I'm using I'm picking the elements of the vector by using those other functions, and then I'm not resetting the pointer, and maybe you should reset the pointer after. So when it gets to the time that I'm gonna do the other loop, the other pick, then it picks a place that doesn't exist, but that wouldn't make a lot of sense because it's checking there to see if the one pointer is greater than the other. So maybe that's not the case, but either way, I think it's better to just comment this out for now. So I have to understand more how the push works and then the pick again. I'll be right back. So this is gonna be the vector and the our index, which is gonna be 0 on the first one. So 0 times the vector size is 0. That's the data. I don't understand this very well. The data is 20 times the size of the thing you created the vector with. So it's 20 plus, like, I don't understand. It's pretty much pointing the pointer at the end of the thing. So maybe it's pushing from right to left, but it wouldn't make sense, I think. I'm just copying the size. So I think that's how it works. Like the index is gonna increase linearly, and then each index is gonna have the size of whatever you initialize the vector with. And because you can only initialize with one data structure, it works. Which is fundamentally different than the other languages, I think. Like, it's probably the same under the hood, but then the other languages do some extra stuff. Sure, that's probably why theirs is lower. So if you have an array that have different data types, it just calculates the size of each thing, like under the hood. But it's still a correlation of the index increases linearly and the size is gonna be, in the other languages it's gonna be arbitrary, but in C it's gonna be whatever size you put there in the beginning. Here it's kind of confusing because their index is gonna be 0 in the first, and I don't, like, the data is the vector. If I no, let me go back. I think it is the number maybe, and the saves is the other vector. So the data is probably this 20 times the size. Yes, the memory that has 20 times, which is this number here, times the size of the thing. So, but I don't understand why he's making the data times the thing. So it's gonna be like 20 in the beginning, 20 times whatever size of the element in the other function there. This function, so it's 20 times the struct. This is gonna be 0, so it initializes the pointer to the end of the data and the vector. I guess this is probably the space. Yeah, but that doesn't make sense either. This is the size of the whole thing, so it's multiplying by the size of the whole thing. So I guess it's growing the vector. I think I've seen this in the video before, that usually it is recommended to people either increase by 2x or 1.5x. I think that's what's happening here. The size of the vector as you add stuff to it. So maybe it does automatically change the size of the vector. Yeah, but I'm not sure if it makes sense the way that I'm thinking about it. So it returns the pointer to the end of the vector. Then it copies I don't know how this works really well. So this resizes the vector. So it's just pushing the element probably to the pointer based on size. I have to understand how this works better. I don't think I need to understand this very well now. This doesn't matter that much as long as I understand like on the surface level. Obviously, based on the names, it's easy to see what's happening here. So it checks to see if it overflowed the size of the vector, and if it doesn't, it returns. If it did, it just calls this memory, which is gonna call this function, which is gonna put more memory, I think. So it's just resizing the vector. And the most confusing to me is the pointers here. I don't understand why, like this calculation here. I understand that, I think that it is setting the pointer to the end of the vector, but I don't like. So the thing that is kind of confusing to me is that on the surface level, I think what this is doing is just copying the data for the element to whatever the pointer is. But what is kind of confusing is that it's just doing the calculations with numbers, and I don't understand how this is related to the, like how does it infer that it is related to the vector? Because it is accessing the vector data, but it should be just a number, I think. But maybe it is like the number is the directly connected with the memory, so because you're accessing it, it already knows. But like this thing here, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The way that I imagine in my mind is just like this is just gonna be replaced with a number, not the address of the thing. And then it's gonna do this calculation. It's gonna return this to the pointer. So the pointer is just going to be a number. So the question is, how is the number related to the vector? I think the only explanation would be that it's not just the number, it's also the location in memory of the number of the vector. But it doesn't make a lot of sense. So the question is, what can I ask to clarify this? Why does it associates with the vector? So maybe I should understand this one first, like better. Vector each size is gonna be the size of the thing. Size of each element, I think. Yeah, it's just the size of the element. So in my case, would be the size of the node. So that's the size. And then it's multiplying that based on the... Well, I think I confused, because I was thinking about the E size as the size of the whole thing, but it's just the size of the element. So that makes a lot more sense. I think I was just confused there. So what it's doing is just multiplying the index based on its size, obviously. So that makes a lot more sense. So the index is the index of the thing, and the size is the size of the vector. But what it doesn't make sense to me still is the... Well, I guess the data is the baseline. So in the beginning, the data is 0, maybe? No. No, the data is gonna be the 20 thing there. Because when it initializes everything should be 20 times the size of the thing. So that's the... So data is the space in memory. I think that's what I'm confusing here. So is adding to the space in memory the index of the thing, but what doesn't make a lot of sense is that, like, shouldn't you do this calculation only when you overflow the index? Because that way you're always gonna be... Oh no, maybe it's... How can I clarify this? The confusing thing is how the numbers relate to the memories. Maybe I should like research malloc again to understand more how it works. But on the conceptual level, I think I get it. It's still kind of confusing on the conceptual level as well. Like, why does it set? Because the baseline, the way that I'm thinking about now is just the data is going to be the space in memory that contains the size of the thing that you initialize the vector with, which in my case is going to be the struct node, times this number, which is 20. So it initializes the space in memory with 20 units of the thing, of the vector. So 20 indexes. And then on the when you're pushing, it's gonna use this size as a baseline. So that's the thing that is kind of confusing, because it's adding a number to the memory, and I don't understand how that works really well. And the number is gonna be the index times the size of the thing. So, which makes sense, because obviously if you wanna the index times the size of the thing makes sense, because if you wanna add one stuff, then obviously it means that you should move the pointer as much as the size of the stuff you're adding. So if you're adding another node, which is always gonna be the same thing, but if you're adding a node, then it means you should move the pointer like one node unit more. But what it doesn't make sense is why does it add the data to that. So it's probably happening, like a conversion is happening that is just like changing the data itself based on the number, and it does that by adding one to the other. That's the... But then it is also confusing, because on the index 0 it's not going to change anything. So I guess like it is supposed to be that way, because in the index 0 you just want to occupy the space in memory from 0 to whatever the unit is. So I guess that's what's happening. And I think that's what's happening. So, but it is kind of confusing because of the calculation. But I think each time you add something, it's just gonna occupy the size of a memory in data with the thing, and then it's just gonna increase the pointer by the size. And that's what this thing does. So it gets the pointer based on that size. Yeah, but it's still kind of confusing as well. I think the sum here is the thing that is... So I guess a good question would be, what happens when you add a malloc with a number? What does it mean to add space in memory? I think that's what I'm gonna ask ChatGPT. Yeah, so it's getting the memory location with the element that you're pushing. And the destination is going to be the pointer that is based on the calculation from the data and the index. And the number is probably 1. No, the number is the size of the element, so that you initialize in the beginning. So this is like the struct node size, then it's copying this element that is the stuff you are passing, which is the struct node, into this memory location, which is based on the vector data. But it's still kind of confusing to me, so I think I understand now what's happening on the concept level, but it's still kind of confusing to understand how the memory works on the calculation. So I'm just gonna try to clarify that with ChatGPT. And then here is gonna resize the thing. The vector, if it overflows the size. I think I'm gonna get the initialization of the thing first. I'm kind of getting like small headaches, probably because of the T. So I'm gonna get this stuff. I probably don't need to like specify everything. I'm just gonna simplify, and ChatGPT is probably gonna understand. But if I understand correctly, then it's probably not the issue that I'm getting there, because it's probably correct. So what is happening is just appending stuff to the node that is equivalent to the size. But it's still kind of tricky to think about, because like it's copying the memory location for the node. And this is the stuff that is very challenging, and I have to clarify more. Which is not is like how the memory is used through the entirety of the life cycle of the whole application. Like what is happening with the memory of everything. I think that's the part that is difficult to think about. Because if you're passing memory locations around, then how do you know that the memory locations are gonna be like, even if they're not the same, that they're changing the way that it makes sense? How can you visualize that? That's the part that is challenging. And I think in Rust they have lifetimes. So I think that's the same concept here that I'm trying to think about. See, when you use malloc to allocate memory for a dynamically allocated array or structure, the pointer returned by malloc points to the starting address of the allocated memory block. When you perform arithmetic operations like addition or multiplication on this pointer, it affects the memory location it points to, not the value stored in the memory. This is very confusing to understand. Yeah, so you're pretty much just manipulating the pointers, but then how do you... I guess you use the memory copy to store information. So that calculation the only thing that it does is just makes the pointer update to the newest, like, not sure if newest is the right way, but it's pretty much doing what I thought that it was doing. So every time, like the first time it doesn't update, it just... Yeah, but then this is the confusing thing. Because it doesn't make sense for... Like, it would make a lot more sense in my mind if you didn't have this part here, and if you just returned this, but if it was like this, then it wouldn't have anything to do with the malloc as well. So I don't understand. Like in my mind, the way that I think about it is that vector data is just a block, and then the pointer would be like increasing that would just make the pointer go from the end of the block to this value here. But obviously that's not what's happening. Is the pointer is starting in 0 from this value, and then it moves based on the index to the next one. That's very confusing. Allocate block of memory using malloc. The pointer data will point to the starting address of this block. The extraction performs. So it is what I'm thinking about. It's just kind of confusing because the thing itself points to the beginning, but it makes sense. So I don't know why. I think intuitively it makes more sense for me to imagine pointing to the right, because it's just like embedded into my brain. It probably comes from writing stuff, because when I think about writing, you just write this stuff and then you stop at the end, obviously. So like in my mind, I think creating the malloc is the same thing. So like when you allocate the memory, then you stop at the end, but that's not what's happening. Like you allocate the space in memory, and then it points to the beginning of that space, which does make sense. So when you access that thing, and whatever calculation you're gonna do is just gonna change the pointer from that position, the initial position, inside of the memory. So in the first case it would be 0 because you wanna write in the beginning, and then each time after that you're just increasing by 1. Or increasing by the size of the thing the vector contains. I think I get it now, so yeah, let me go back to the thing to make sure. So this is gonna be a pointer to the beginning of the malloc in the first time this is called, which is the first index, because our index is 0. And then it copies the element that I passed here to that memory location. So just copying the... But I think I have to clarify if it's copying the value or the memory address. Memcopy in C is a standard library function used to copy a block of memory from one location to another. Its name stands for memory copy, and it is defined in the string age header. Pointer to the destination memory where you want to copy the data. Pointer to the source memory location from which you want to copy the data. I think it copies the thing itself, because it's saying that it's copying the data, so it just gets the 2 pointers in memory and then copies the data from one to the other. Number of bytes, okay, that makes sense. But just to clarify, I think I'm gonna ask again. I think it is the data. Actual data. Yeah. So, yeah, that makes sense. And then it resizes. Yeah, this one I'm not gonna spend a lot of time. Maybe I should just ask. But I think I kind of understand. It's just gonna reallocate memory, as the name says. And this is probably just another variable that is gonna indicate for how much you're gonna grow which is the baseline in the beginning. So it grows by 20 units each time. There's an overflow. Yes, like this makes things harder, I think, because now it's probably nothing here that is creating the error that I'm getting. I forgot. I need to compile this again and then run again. Also have to search for how to disable these warnings here that are very annoying. This is the stuff that I mean that it shows here. Oh, interesting. It's showing after the thing. So I'm gonna remove the print from the other thing. I'm just gonna recompile and then run again, so Yeah, here is not printing anything here. So it means that this is not being called, which means like it's probably because I don't have a function there on the task C thing. So maybe what I can do is just put, oh no, it does have a function here. So I'm not really sure why it's not printing anything. Pen size for a variable list. Because I don't know what this is supposed to do. I'm gonna have to watch the course a bunch of times again. But there like it doesn't do the whole compiler there, so there might be stuff here that comes from the other modules that I haven't watched. But I'm just gonna ignore this stuff for now. So it looks like this is not being called anywhere, so... Oh, actually, I'm gonna copy this. And here I did print the node ID, and it seems like it is working, so... Like it shows the IDs there. So I think that this part is working, like it is creating the node correctly, and then it's pushing into this thing. I guess this is another question, is because like... Yeah, but I guess in the moment that I create the vector based on this size here, it's gonna take into account that these values can change. Because here, I think that this shard, maybe I should ask about this shard as well. Is a pointer to a char, so I'm not really sure. Like, I think as far as I understand right now, it's gonna be dynamically allocated. So like, even though it's a const, like the size of the thing is only gonna be determined once it's assigned, I think. So like the question is that I have in my mind right now is that if I create a vector based on this size here, how does it know how much it's gonna be if this stuff is gonna change? But I think because you're passing this and it already has access to these data types, it already accounts for that when it creates the vector. But it is kind of confusing because it means that they can have dynamic sizes, like one size can be different than the other because of the differences in here. So maybe this is where the error is coming from. So I think I'm gonna try to ask ChatGPT the question. The question I was thinking about, I just have to clarify a little bit more, like how to ask in a way that is gonna give me some useful output. So I guess the question is, the problem is that it involves the code that I have there, and I don't want to paste a bunch of code. But I want to understand, like, how does C know that if I can have inside of the struct some data type that is gonna be different for each struct, how does C know how much memory to allocate? But I think that's embedded into the struct, but I'm not 100% sure. So I wanna think about a way to ask this. I'm not really sure if that's a good. Like, I think it's kind of confusing. Maybe I should ask like this and then expand later. Because I think a better way would be to like say that the struct uses the vector is initialized with the size of the struct. It is a const char type on it. If the size of each const char can depend based on which struct is being pushed on the vector, how does the vector know the size of the memory to allocate? Yeah, it's probably good enough. By the sum of the sizes of its individual members, just a pointer to the character array, a string, and the size of the pointer itself is typically constant regardless of the length of the string it points to. So maybe this is one. I definitely should think about this more. Because it might be the problem with the thing. Because the moment I initialize the node, I'm assigning the value. Yeah, I have to clarify what is happening when I assign the value of the token. Because I think I'm assigning a pointer to the value of the token to a pointer to a pointer of the node. So the label is initialized as a pointer to a string, and that pointer points to the pointer of the token. There's a pointer to a pointer. So maybe I have to dereference twice on the other functions. It's very confusing. So I was gonna delete this and then I'm gonna run again to see the nodes here. But I think that the issue is probably this thing about the string, maybe. I have to clarify this stuff here specifically. So I'm receiving a pointer to the token. And then I'm making that equal to a pointer to a string. So this is a pointer. This is just gonna be this. I think now it makes sense to me why he did it this way, because it makes it easier to initialize the struct. Because then this is always gonna have the same size. It's just gonna be a pointer to another place in memory. So this is a pointer to the pointer. That's the thing that is kind of confusing. So I think that this is pointing twice. So it points to the pointer of the token that contains the value. But the question is, on this moment, on the moment that I run this function here, like what happens? And I guess that I still have the token, but I'm not 100% sure. In memory. Because the way that he did here, like on the other functions, because he is initializing the lex process as a pointer as well, and then he's passing that through several different functions. So I think that means that you don't lose the value. Otherwise he would have done it in a different way. So here he's initializing lex process here and then passing to several different functions. And this and this. Not several, just sure, but. And I did the same way here. I'm not sure if I'm assuming right now that the token still exists throughout the whole program, and he says, he explains on the course that he didn't worry about memory management when he was creating this because it's already really hard to create a compiler, so which is fair, I think. But that means probably that he didn't delete the tokens anywhere. And if that's the case, then I should have access to the tokens on the moment that I call in the function, the other function. And then if that's the case, then I don't see why. The problem is related to the nodes, so it is probably related to this. But let me just run again, and then I'll continue to think about. I'm gonna have to spend a bunch more time thinking about what is the best way to go about it, because it's the main thing that I was is the stuff that I wrote on the blog post about the paradox of search. I think that's the fundamental challenge here, is that it's gonna be very I can find information on anything, I think, but it's gonna be very hard to restructure, and it is the same problem that I have with the lead code problems, which it doesn't really matter if you can solve one problem or the other. It doesn't make sense for me to think about it like that. It makes a lot more sense to think about it approaching from a place of how can I restructure the way that I go about solving problems instead of focusing on solving the problem itself. And that's the biggest problem. So the lead code paradigm of thinking is just I give you 100 physics problems, and then you have to think about how to solve each problem at a time, and then based on the way you solve all the 100 problems, you derive the laws of physics from that in your mind. That's what's happening, I think. So you're learning the fundamental basic principles of physics by solving one problem at a time, but that's very inefficient. This makes a lot more sense to learn the laws of physics first, and then learn how to approach each problem with the laws of physics in mind. So that way you learn how to solve any problem. So there's always a meta algorithm when you're doing something, which is the steps you take and the reflections you make to solve something. And this is has been the hardest part of learning, and is related to the paradox of search, because most of the systems are going to be based on the superficial level, I think, which is just because it's very hard to, the other approach is very hard to think about. So usually when I'm thinking about doing something on programming, I already have built in my mind some ways to think about things. That's and it is subconscious at first because you don't think about this thing, so you're just concerned of how can I achieve this thing, and then based on how can you're trying to achieve this thing, you get some habits of the way you go about doing things. But the problem is that, and this is the paradox, because in the beginning you don't know anything, so it's the simplest way to put it is that, let's say you're always applying the brute force solution for each thing. So that's gonna make it so everything works, you do things the right way, not the right way, you do things in a way that allows you to solve all the problems you have. But the problem it is that even though you're getting the results, you're creating the habit in your mind of thinking about problems coming from the brute force solution way of thinking. So the challenge is not just how to solve the problem. The challenge is how do I understand what is the difference between the brute force approach and the optimal approach, and why is my subconscious mind always getting me to think about the brute force solution first. Like, what is it that makes me think in a way that leads me to getting to the brute force solution? And that's the thing that I think you should focus most of the time. Like, it's trying to fix your mind in the way that you approach the problem. So your default response is already calibrated to shift more towards the optimal solution because you're aware of how your mind is gonna have tendencies that are not optimal. So, and that's the hardest part. But then the reason why you're not gonna find most stuff about this is because it's gonna be complicated. Because it's gonna go towards infinite complexity, and it's not reducible, but it is to some degree. But then there's always the line of like how much each thing. It's very similar to the laws of physics, I think, as well. So I guess this is like one of the main things I should try to focus here, like on highlighting. It's like how can I extract the fundamental patterns of programming, and then highlight the distance between the fundamental and the nuance, so that I can create something that allows me to highlight the paths of how you should go about thinking about solving the problems. When choose each thing. Yeah, the node seems to be working, so it is putting the correct indexes, I think. Oh, the other thing that I remember now that I had to do, and I forgot, is that if I do it this way, then it doesn't capture the last token, so I have to do it outside here as well. Because this is gonna stop after, so it creates a new one and then it stops on here. But maybe, let me think about this. Because it is 36 there based on the thing that I was getting before, the other print statement. Yeah, but here is maybe this doesn't make sense because the next one is gonna be no, so I think the other stuff is this way is probably correct. So never mind, because we go from 0 to 35. Yeah, but because of the ID is correct, I think that the problem with highlighting the other one is the thing that I talked about, that C is gonna show the number and not it's gonna show the number that is related to the address in memory and not the value itself. But maybe it's showing the number because of the const char thing, because it is supposed to be a pointer, not the string itself. But I think even with, as soon as you have more complicated data types, it's not gonna print the thing. You have to figure out a way or an algorithm to extract the actual data from the address, I think. Yeah, it just shows a bunch of numbers, so. But I think the problem is not here probably, so it must be. So I think that, yeah, now that I understand a little bit more how this works, I think that's, I don't see a reason for it to be wrong, and this is probably creating the tokens the correct way as well. So the challenging thing is that I don't know an easy, maybe I should ask that through ChatGPT, like an easy way to print the vector itself. Because the only way that I think about it is that I'm gonna have to loop over the vector again, and then it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, I wanna see if there's a way to print the whole thing, but there's probably isn't. Maybe I should ask here. But I'm assuming that this is probably correct. So if it is correct, then the problem is on the other function, on the save. So it makes me think that probably, because this function I'm not gonna see now, I'm gonna try to solve this other one first, and then I'll look into the other one. But here, like, the problem is that it's not going in the loop, so yeah, I guess this one I haven't seen. I think it's not going because it's 0, so because it is 0 because I'm setting the pointer which is 0, so let me think about this. This is getting the index, which is gonna be 0. I'll be right back. But I'm gonna spend some time now trying to understand these functions better, because I'm pretty confident now that the problem is probably because of these two functions. It has to be. It can't be this here because it's not even going in the loop. So the problem is that this is 0, I think, in the beginning, based on what I printed. And it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to be 0 because the other way on here, that's how he does it, so it should be something else maybe, but maybe not. So yeah, but I'll be right back. I'm gonna do my more 20 minutes and then I'm gonna do another yoga nidra thing. Maybe get something to eat, and then I think I'm gonna remove the camera and probably stay for another 1.5 hours. And the remainder of this time I will keep reading this article here and watching these videos. Not article, this is a book about interpreters. Very good so far, so. So it's setting the p index to 0, and then here passing the so what this should do is go into the vector and then get the first element, I think, or a pointer to the first element. It could be 0 because the other one is not working, but I don't see how that would be the case, because from the source code it seems that it should be working, so it's just gonna return the... I don't know why 2 pointers as well there. The pointers is very confusing. It's gonna take some time, sure. Get used to this. It's like pointers everywhere. So just check to see when I bounce. This is the one that I was looking at before. So the pointer is gonna be the first place in the memory, the vector data memory. And then just returns this. So this function just returns the pointer. So it's gonna be the 0 in the malloc of the vector data that it returns. And create slots. So it probably goes into this one, which is just increased by 1, the p index, and then returns the pointer. So it's just returning a pointer to the place in memory. So maybe that's the error, but I don't see, like, the only reason why it doesn't make sense is because that's how he did it here. So like, it's kind of weird to me, unless he made a mistake, which could be the case. Because if it's always gonna be 0, then like, it doesn't make sense to do it like this. But unless that's... Yeah, but you're setting the pointer to 0 here. Let me think. Unless the vector data is not 0. The moment... yeah, let me... Maybe it's... I think I need to go back to see, to understand more how malloc works. Because maybe it shouldn't be 0 by default. Yeah, maybe that's the problem, because it could be that I'm not appending the correct way. But I'm just appending this way because it's the way that he does it here. And I am getting a pointer here as well. And it looks like I'm getting... So the biggest issue is because I can't print the vector itself. So I know I have the node because I printed the ID and it works. But I'm not really sure if I have the node inside of the vector. That's the problem. Because maybe it shouldn't be 0 there in the beginning. Because it's only... Maybe it's only gonna be 0 if you don't have any elements on the vector. And that's why this is returning 0. because it's pointing to the first place in the memory on the malloc, which is the vector data thing, and is returning 0, which is going to be this, and then it doesn't loop. So that should only be the case, I think, when you don't have any data in the malloc. So it's probably the mistake is here, but so it could be the way that I'm passing the graph. But the thing is that like, I'm doing exactly the way that he did it for the process. So I don't understand really well. And I can't change the way that I pass, because then it's gonna complain. The compiler is gonna complain about the types. So I guess it comes back to... Maybe I can try to print the vector data instead. The malloc. Because the graph node is gonna be a struct. I think I'm gonna try to do that. I forgot where I was printing stuff before. So instead of printing the vector, I try to print the data here. Now I'm gonna ask ChatGPT to clarify how the malloc works. Yeah, this is what I was thinking, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe it does make sense, because then it's gonna allow me to see, like, instead of printing the node itself, I'm printing the location in memory that is related to the vector. So if I loop, it's gonna allow me to see if the vector has elements or not, but maybe I'll do that after. I think that first I have to see the malloc thing. It goes back to the calculation that is kind of confusing. That is adding the size of the... is adding the malloc with the index times the size of the thing. And that's kind of confusing to me, because the way that I think about memory is just gonna be an arbitrary number that is related to either the heap or the stack. So... but I guess that, like... it kind of does make sense, because either, regardless of... maybe that's the fundamental difference between calloc and malloc. But I think that's the thing that I have to clarify, so... because from the videos I saw, calloc initializes everything as 0. But I guess this is the confusion, is because... there's the number related to the address and the number related to the data inside of the address. So... I think calloc initializes everything as 0, but it's the data, not the address. And malloc doesn't necessarily initialize everything as 0. And then what you're adding when you do operations on the malloc thing itself is not related to the data, it's just related to the address. Yeah, I think it returns the pointer, which is just the address in the memory. So when you do operations, it changes the address, not the... it changes the pointer, not the data. the pointer holds. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case based on the previous responses. But then, let me think. Because y would be 0 here. So here is setting the p pointer to 0, and then we're passing the vector. And here is going to increase to 1 after it peaks. This is going to be the pointer. Hey, it's just returning the pointer related to the malloc. So I guess the question is gonna be, I'm gonna ask this question. Here I think I'm gonna try to print this. So there. So I'm printing the data for the thing, which is the malloc thing. Yeah, malloc. So this shouldn't be. It is getting 0. I think that is gonna give me 0, but I think it should change. I have no idea. I think it should be 0 if there isn't any elements on the vector, and the moment you pass elements it should change, but I'm not really sure. Because it wouldn't make sense. Obviously, if I want to loop through the thing then it makes sense to always put the p index pointer to the beginning of the vector, because obviously I want to loop from left to right. So p index should always be 0. So it wouldn't make any sense for this to return 0 as well. This should, the index is gonna be 0, this is gonna be 0, this is gonna be this value which represents the malloc. So it shouldn't be 0 because it should be the number equivalent to the data. So I assume that like the only thing that makes sense in my mind that is going on here is something related to the way that I'm initializing the graph and passing the graph around here. Maybe it's because I'm passing here and then passing here again, but that also doesn't make a lot of sense to me because it's the same thing that he's doing here. So it should be passing the same graph, the same vector for both of them. So, and from what I'm thinking now, this shouldn't be returning 0, should be returning something else because the malloc has data allocated to it. Or the data exists, so yeah, I'm not really sure. I have to clarify more on how the malloc works. Value returned by malloc is a pointer to the first byte of the block of memory that was allocated. This pointer represents the address in memory where the allocated block starts. Self is not the same as the address, rather it's a representation of that address. Operation on the pointer values such as addition or subtraction are manipulating the address it points to, not changing the pointer value itself. These operations allow you to navigate within the allocated memory block. Pointer value returned by malloc is an abstraction that represents the address in memory. It's an implementation detail provided by the C compiler and standard library to allow you to work with memory address. More intuitive way, you're effectively moving the pointer within the block of memory. That makes sense. Is the specific value of the pointer returned by malloc is implementation dependent and not predictable. It can vary each time you run your program, and it is unrelated to the actual contents or size of the allocated memory block. This is why it's essential to use the pointer returned by malloc and not try to predict or manipulate its value directly. But if it works like this, then it doesn't make a lot of sense the way he did things there, because okay, if it is unpredictable, the value that the pointer is going to be, then the function returns is always unpredictable, because it's returning the pointer to the malloc thing. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. Unless I'm not understanding things correctly. So I guess it changes here based on the value, like the 20 value of the size of the thing. No, there's more than 20 there. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Maybe should print like outside and then after, but it's obviously gonna be, maybe not obviously, but it's gonna be two different numbers, I think. But it doesn't tell me anything. That it doesn't make sense for like it seems that this is true. No, it's more than, it's like 4 different numbers, but they are repeated a lot. So I need to clarify more what this is, like what is this returning? It seems like it is the pointer to the memory, so it's always gonna have the, this is not very clear based on this response here. So the way that I'm thinking based on this previous response is that like this is not the it's not the address of the data itself, it's just a pointer to the block of space of memory that it was allocated based on the malloc. So the value should always be the same for each instance that you initialize the thing. And it's gonna be a number. And then any mathematical operation you do related to this is gonna be related to the where the pointer is pointer within the block of space of memory. So when it increments there with the vector, what it's doing is just getting that space of memory, and then it's just increasing the pointer to the right, the way that I'm imagining. So it's like moving the pointer within the array based on the size of memory that was allocated when it initialized the vector, which in my case is the struct node. So initialize is based on the struct node, and then when you pick, it's just gonna move the pointer based on the amount of data for a struct node to the right, the way that I'm thinking about it. So because it's summing based on the initial data. But the confusing thing is that like the vector data is going to be, in my mind right now, is going to be a fixed number. It's going to depend on the execution. So it's like going to be an arbitrary number, and then the mathematical operations are going to be related to that arbitrary number. But if that's the case, then it doesn't make a lot of sense, because it's using the same pointer here for the other function. For this condition here, like it's returning the same pointer to the vector data. Which in this case here, I'm getting 0. So that would mean that the pointer here is always 0 when you initialize. And it's not because the memory address is 0, it's just the pointer is like saying that it's pointing to the initial location of the block of memory, which is always 0. But then if that's the case, then it doesn't make any sense, because you're setting to 0 here, the other pointer, and this one's going to be 0. Which means that this value is going to be 0, which means that's not gonna loop through the thing. So the way that he did things here, it wouldn't make sense. So it's probably because I'm not understanding correctly the way that malloc works here. So I have to clarify this. But I think that this is probably, for this bug that I'm getting, is probably the error. Hopefully, and the other stuff is correct, I think. But I'm not sure, obviously. Because I think that it's unlikely that this will give an error because the array is working. Now, obviously, it could give me an error, but I think if I solve this one, if this is not 0 in the beginning, then it's gonna loop and then it's gonna append. And then I have to think about the other error. But maybe I'm doing, probably I'm doing something wrong as well, because the other function is not working, this one. And this one is related to this segmentation faults. So it's, I'm probably doing something wrong when it comes to this thing here. Obviously, it's either this function or this one. But I think that the reason why this one is wrong is probably because of the way that I'm doing things here. Because I thought that this would be the easiest way based on the functions, because I didn't want to look into these functions. I just wanted to see if it's gonna work or not. So the easiest way that I thought about making it work is that I pick twice here to get 2 different nodes, and like I connect them sequentially. So each iteration I'm making the value of one equal to the other one, to the next one, through this here. But I think that this is probably the error that I'm getting. And it is because of the memory thing, because in other languages I think this would work, but maybe it's not the best practice. Because I'm reassigning the value of this one to be equal to the other one. But because of the way that the memory is structured on the vector, it probably is fucking up it's not finding the node, I think. Or yeah, or it's creating a reference or whatever. It's hard to know because it's hard to visualize. So, and because I don't have any messages, it's kind of difficult to know exactly where the problem is coming from. It might be because of the, but like this one I'm passing like this because the other ones also pass like this. But maybe not, maybe that's the error that I have there. Oh, but if I don't have that, then it complains. But maybe I should initialize as the... Yeah, I think that's probably the error. I should initialize as a pointer. And then I... But I think it is not the same thing, actually. So if I initialize as a pointer, then I'm passing the pointer. If I do the other way, I'm passing the value. Maybe that's the problem. Yeah, I think maybe that's the problem. So initialize this as a pointer in memory, and then I pass the pointer, and this is supposed to receive a pointer. Maybe that's the problem. So let me think about it. So it'll be the same for each execution of a program. When you allocate memory using malloc, the specific memory address returned can vary from one program execution to another. It depends on factors such as the current state of the system's memory allocator. I think I'm gonna run this again, compile and run. Because now I'm just printing twice here, and then I'm gonna do the like that several times. Oh, this is the... Well, but maybe if I just use the arrow. Because when I built this, I was just trying to make like something fast to see if it worked or not. If it doesn't work, I just go back and then I focus on this after. I think I'm gonna... I'll just run again. Yeah, so it's different. So it is kind of... Yeah, I don't like this very much, so... But maybe it's very unlikely that it will be 0, but it's still kind of... not very good. Because then you're like depending on luck, just see if it's gonna work or not. But maybe it's never 0, because the only moment where it is 0 is when you don't have data, maybe. But then it should be 0 in the beginning here, because I think a better way is just to print on outside there, because then definitely it's supposed to be 0 if it is 0 on the initialization, because I won't have any data here, so... But if it is arbitrary, then it is a problem, and I don't understand why he did things like this. If I'm thinking about it in the correct way, because then like this value is always going to be arbitrary, so it can be the case that it's going to be 0 at some point, and then it's going to fuck up everything. It's just by chance, but yeah, maybe not. And because the only reason why I'm doing like this is because I saw from here, which is pretty much the same thing that I'm doing there, so. But I don't know where this vector comes from, so it might be another difference. But either way, it doesn't matter, because I think this is returning the data from the vector, so it's also going to be random if it is a random number. It depends on the execution, so. Interesting. Yeah, why is it... Why does it work when I print there and not here? Because it should be creating the data here. So the only explanation is the pointer, but it is gonna be a pointer either way, I think. But maybe it's because it... But I think this is not gonna work, so... It is receiving as a pointer in the function. So the thing is that it worked when I was printing here, and I was printing before I appended anything. So this shouldn't be the problem. Oh, it's probably because of the... I have to import here. That's why. It's because I'm accessing the vector, but I don't have the vector on here. So I think this is the reason. Oh, I'm printing on the... I'm using on the wrong place. That's here. This is another thing that I just did like this, so I could fix all the errors that I was getting, but I don't know where it is. I think it's using this... It's calling these functions here on the preprocessor part, but I don't remember really well all the stages of the preprocessor, and I think the preprocessor is related to the include modules thing. Is where he parses the include modules stuff, but I don't remember really well. And inside of here, he uses this lax function. So I just created another graph, and then I passed here because now that I modified this one, that I changed this one, I have to pass a graph. So I just did it like this so I could ignore this part here, but later on I'm gonna think about this as well, which means like I'm probably gonna have to change everything. And I had to change a bunch of different functions inside of this preprocessor part because of this graph, or somewhere else that also requires like a function. Then I had to pass the graph everywhere on those functions. But I don't think that those functions are the things that are giving me problems here. So I'll think about that later. Initially, I'm just gonna try to create the simplest graph as possible. Then once I'm able to do that, then I focus on improving or thinking about different ways to do it. So now it's probably because of this. So it does initialize this number already, so So the other stuff should be returning something different than a 0. So let me go back just to... It is still not very... I'm just gonna trust that it is correct because it's the way that he did it, but it's kind of sus to me, because if it's not deterministic, then how can you rely on that? So yeah. So this sets the p index, I think, so to 0, and let's scan in the vector. And I guess the malloc. So I think that this should be the same number I'm getting here. The one that this function returns, which is this one. So this function should return this number here. So now let me print again. I'm gonna print the function itself and not the current node, because maybe that's the issue. The return of the function. I think after I'm also gonna run with GDB to show the segmentation thing. No, so it is 1. Oh, it is 1, but it should be this one. But it's not 0, so maybe it's just because I'm dereferencing here. Maybe that's the... because I'm creating a pointer, so the pointer is gonna be 0. But I think the reason why I did like this is because he doesn't like this. And why is it 1 and not the number? I guess it's just because of the calculation there, but it should be 0 in the beginning. Because the p index is going to be 0 because it's set to 0 here. Yeah, so p index is going to be 0. Oh, it's going to be 1 after the function runs. So maybe it is returning... No, it returns the pointer though. So p index is going to be 1. Here it's still 0, so yeah. So this is supposed to be 0 vector. So index is 0, so 0 times the size is 0. Plus, and this should be this number here. So obviously what I can do... The problem with printing directly here is that I think other parts of the program might use this, so it's not gonna allow me to see. Let me do this again. I'm gonna do it like this first, then I'll try to remove. Yeah, I have no idea why it's giving me... Based on everything that I saw there with ChatGPT and that I'm thinking about, it should be this number here, because this is the one But probably it changes, the number changes after I add the nodes. That's another thing. But it doesn't make sense to be 1. Like, it should be a random number that is the same as the... Oh, it would make sense because I'm calling it here and then I'm printing here, so no, it doesn't make sense, but like it makes sense to be the number that is related to the p index, which would be 1 because I'm calling here and then here. So it means that the pointer is at 1 and here it was at 0. So it would mean that this is returning the p index pointer and not the vector data. But based on the functions there, it seems like it is returning the... Maybe it's because of these two things here. Yeah, maybe it's because it's dereferencing the pointer, like it's a pointer to a pointer. Yeah, I have no idea. I think what it's doing is just returning the p index. It's returning the pointer inside of the block of memory. So like the random number is where, like, is the pointer to where the memory location is at, the memory block. And because of all these other pointers, it's what returns is that inside of the memory block itself where the pointer is at. So there's two different pointers. One is this number here that points to the memory block location, and the other is the pointer inside of the memory block. And I think because it uses the asterisk, I think twice, the operator twice, it gets the pointer inside of the memory block, which is where the pointer is currently at. But if that's the case, then it should always return 0 when it puts like this. And then it wouldn't make sense to do it like the way that he did it here. It's always going to be 0. And then it means that it's never going to loop. Unless there's something related to the vector that makes it not be 0. It's very confusing. Zero. So it, like, I understand what's happening now, but I don't understand why. So I have to think about how to clarify this. This function returns where the pointer is at in the pointer of the black block. Maybe I should do some scatter draw thing here. I understand what's going on, but not why it's going on. It's like you have so this is the malloc. If the malloc is this thing and is pointing to this, which is the memory block. And then inside of the memory block, you have another pointer. and then here would be the value. That's how I'm thinking about it right now. So when it initializes the number, the big number, is this pointer here, which just says where is this memory block located in the bigger memory space. And then when you use the double asterisk thing, this operator here, because you're using it twice, it indicates this one here, not this pointer here. And this pointer is the one that represents where the value is, where the value that the pointer inside has. So in this case, in the beginning would be 0, because it's pointing to the beginning of the memory block space. Then after you pick once, it's gonna point to the next one, which is 1. So that's what's happening, but it's confusing to understand like why is it happening this way. And if it is happening this way, then it doesn't make any sense to do it like this, because it's always gonna be 0, so. And I think that if I put another condition here to be greater than 0, greater or equal to 0, it's gonna loop forever. So I think that like this makes sense if the last element is null. But I could try just put this, or but if this is 0, it also doesn't make sense, because let me do it like this to see if I get a different result. Because if this is 0, it's not the data itself, it's just the pointer. So we need to dereference twice. Or like use the asterisk again to get the value, not the pointer. So I can convert. So now I think I have to use, so probably the way that I'm thinking about it is correct, because now I'm getting the struct instead of getting the pointer. But I still don't understand why he did it like this here. It's always going to be 0, so it doesn't make sense. And the thing is, like, I don't want to, because I can find a solution here, but if I don't understand this, the way he did it here, then like even though I might be able to make it work, but then I'm making it work in the wrong way. That makes sense. So I want to understand why he did it like this here. Maybe I should go back now to watch the course again, and then yeah, I think that's what I should do probably. Because obviously the way that I can solve this is just make another condition here, and then here, instead of using this, I can either use, like, do it like this here, and then do another condition here, it's gonna loop, and then dereference this inside, and then I use the dot instead of the arrow. So the dot is gonna allow me to access the value. The arrow is when you wanna dereference the value, I think. No, I'm not 100% sure, so I'm gonna test. See if stops complaining. Then it's gonna complain about this one, but maybe not the other ones. Now it's complaining invalid initializer. Yeah, but I think that's what I just said makes sense, so. And I think it has to be like this, because that is gonna be, like, the types have to be the same. Since this is gonna return a pointer, I can't initialize as a struct. Maybe Yeah, so maybe try the other thing. So, oh, actually, it's probably better to leave like this. I have to look it up, the difference between this one and the asterisk as well. 'Cause I'm not sure if using the, because obviously I have the pointer here and I want to access the value, so I'm not really sure. From what I've seen, usually people do this one to access the value, but I'm not really sure what the differences are, and I'm not really sure if I use this one, if it's gonna access the value or not. So I have to remember this. Maybe it's the way that I'm initializing that could be the problem. But here he is also using struct. Hmm. So let me try the other thing. Yeah, so I don't know. I think this is fine because the only problem is the condition there. Because even though I'm getting the pointer, when I use the arrow, it's gonna destruct. It's gonna access the value of destruct and not the pointer. But the problem is that it's not looping over because it's always gonna be, the current node is always gonna be 0. So I have to understand more. I have to go back to the course and understand why he did it like this. And then I'm gonna leave the other stuff for later. But maybe the problem with the other one is because I was initializing like in that way and then passing as a reference. Or dereferencing, so passing the value instead of the pointer. So I think I have to allocate here. That's the problem. Like I need to allocate memory and then pass that. That's the issue. So the way that I'm initializing here is wrong. So I need to do it like this. Yeah. So I initialize the space in memory, then I make all of this stuff. Then after that, I pass this here. That's probably the way. Probably the reason why I was getting segmentation faults. This here is also allocating space in memory, I think. Yeah. And it's passing this one here, and then it's pushing the same way. Process. So I think I'm gonna stop here because now the best thing to do is probably go back to the course and then try to understand why he did it like this. Maybe I can try, like, yeah, I don't think it's worth it just to find the hack here, true. I guess I'm gonna put, but it's gonna loop forever, that's the problem. Maybe I can put, like, while is, like, this. Because then I know that's gonna, or 5. It's gonna increase each time that I do this here. Because this is gonna be the pointer. So maybe we can test to see if it's gonna work. If it doesn't, then I'm gonna just watch the course again, then think about it again. Not sure if it worked. I have to print something inside of here, just see. Is there might, yeah, it's not creating the file. So now it's something else, probably. Because it should be at least creating the file, so maybe it's something inside. So I'm gonna print something inside of here, just see. In comparison between pointer and integer. That's probably the issue. But it should be saving. So maybe there's an error with this stuff here as well. So it might be the problem with this thing here, that it doesn't access the value and then it breaks. Because it is printing, which means it is running this stuff, but then it probably breaks and doesn't. So maybe I should. Yeah, the thing about the GDB is that you can put the breakpoint, I think, here, or I just call the file and then you put the breakpoints, but it's kind of confusing. I think it's like break here. And then run. And then you can put the other commands to go over. And step intro. But this is what I mean, that this kind of is a lot different than the other languages, because it just shows the threads here and this addresses in memory, so segmentation faults. So that means it's trying to access. So let me. So the problem is probably this thing here, because I'm trying to access the ID, but it doesn't have because I'm using the pointer. So I have to clarify, like, why exactly he did it like this here. Yeah, now it doesn't show anything. It doesn't show because I'm trying to print the thing that is. So maybe if I use GDB again. Yeah, segmentation fault, so it's pretty sure that's the problem. So I can't access like this, and I have to think about a way to use the pointer to get the data. So I'm gonna watch the course again. I'm gonna stop streaming here now. Probably, and when I come back, I'm gonna continue to do this now. So the plan now is to watch the course and try to clarify why, because the main point of confusion is why he did it like this here. And I think if I spend time, I can figure out how to make it work, but I want to make sure that I'm thinking about it in the correct way. So I'm gonna watch the course and see, and try to understand why he did it like this on this part. And after I understand that, then I'll go back. And either I'm gonna change this, or I'm gonna try to think about. But the way that I think probably I can solve this is like, first I'm gonna have to think about a way to change the condition here, and then I can use the pointer to get the data. So I have to see if there's any function here that is gonna allow me to use the pointer to get the actual data, which is gonna be the struct node. Once I get the actual data, then I can access the values and then I can convert. I think that it's unlikely that the error is gonna be on this library here, because this one works. But obviously there could be an error as well, but then I think that the biggest issue is this one with the pointer here. So if I'm able to access the value from the node here, then I think the rest is gonna work. And if this works, then the next thing is gonna be to see if this, after I changed here, should be like this, if it's gonna work or not. Which I think it probably will. I think that was probably the error. That the way that I was passing stuff here wasn't the correct way and initializing. So if both of those things work, then the other thing that I'm gonna have to do is just finish the data structure here. I'm gonna create another object here outside. The object is gonna contain the JSON object is gonna contain the key value pairs for the nodes and edges. And the structure that I want to get is the same structure that I'm using on the front end. So after I do that, then all I have to do is just the same loop for the edges as well, and build the array of the edges. Then build the final object, and then I save the object to the file. Then once I get to the point and I have the file for the graph, then I can take the graph and see how it's going to look on the front end. And then after that point, I'm just going to iterate a bunch of times to change things until I get to a point where, like, the main goal is to have like a standard of different graphs that I'm gonna do, because I don't wanna, I wanna see if I can think about a way that I can get like standard ways of extracting the information that allow me to not have to change the way that I'm capturing in the graph. So like standard templates of the different graphs that I can build. Because then if I'm able to generate these standard templates for generating graphs, then I don't have to think about this part anymore. I can just scale based on this, because I'm always going to use the same code. And then from this part, it's just going to be like a generator of JSON that is going to have the correct templates for different graphs. And then based on that, I create the visualization on the front end based on those graphs. And from that point, it's going to be more about like understanding how to scale this, like create the server, the API, and thinking about how to extract information from the internet and like putting everything together. So yeah, but next time probably gonna do this. Not really sure how long it's gonna take for me to figure it out, but I'm gonna watch the course now. So see you next time.